you, Dave. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Boker Tov, good morning. Extra early morning to all of those who are joining us on the West Coast, maybe some members of Jessica Balk Jones's family. Good evening to those of you who are in London and Bulgaria, or whatever time it is. I'm going to start learning those time zones eventually. It's very important to CBST's sacred practice at this point. Friends, this morning I want to share a little secret with you, which is that the Devar Torah I had written about the pasuk, the line that Yaakov says when he wakes up from his dream, Achein yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh ve'anochi lo yadati. God was in this place. I didn't know. Rabbi Kleinbaum gave that drasha last night, and I was like, it's fine. She's definitely not going to mention the commentary on this that I love so much by Rabbi Larry Koshner. She definitely taught on exactly that commentary. It's okay. There is more to learn. We are taught that in every crown of every letter of the Torah, there are mounds and mounds of knowledge to be gleaned. And we will get a little bit deeper into it because really all I've got left is the fascination with the grammar of that particular line. That's what we're going to learn at Havdalah this evening. So if you join us at 7 p.m., brand new time, 7 p.m. for our Zoom Havdalah where Larry Kay is going to be leading the Havdalah service, we will dive very deep into that particular pasuk. But thank goodness for Rabbi Ari Lev Fornari, a beloved former rabbinical intern of the Cooperberg Ritmaster Variety here at CBST, the exalted position that Dave Yedid now holds, and Rabbi Ari Lev Fornari is now the rabbi of Kol Tzedek, an incredible congregation in Philadelphia, founded by another Cooperberg Ritmaster rabbinical intern, Rabbi Lauren Graybell Herman. And if not for Rabbi Ari Lev Fornari, we would have a lot of repetitive Torah this morning. I want to share with you a beautiful, beautiful Devar Torah teaching that he offered that I was so grateful to learn from very late last night. So to get us started, if it comports with your Shabbat practice, I would ask you to put into the chat something that nourishes you. What nourishes you? You can be extremely literal about this. You can be metaphoric. Put into the chat a thing that keeps you going, provides you with the energy, the stamina, the inspiration, the aspiration that you need to keep going. We have a lot of people who love music, who would be lost without music. Chocolate and coffee are two of my top list. Swimming, other people, Torah, art, Hebrew chanting in particular, s'mores pie. Either Andy Engel or Neil Hoffman has definitely nailed a very important piece of nourishment. Family, friends, nature, flowers, the intimacy of friendship, dance, yoga, chosen family, puppies. Food nourishes Harold, and we really appreciate the literal on that. And for all of the essential workers in the food stores who have literally kept us going and stocked up during COVID, exercise and physical activity, singing, dark chocolate, projects that we're working on, crochet, wonderful husbands, chopped liver. These are all incredible, incredible things that keep us going in so many ways. And what we can see in our Torah portion this morning, and from the interpretations of our Torah portion this morning, there is something highly literal and yet also very metaphoric that keeps the Jewish people going as a community and as individuals. Nobody has yet guessed what it is. There are excellent suggestions, and yet, though we did mention food, we did not mention water. This is the thing that Rabbi Ari Lev Fornari lifted from this week's Torah portion. Because among the many exciting episodes that happen in this particular chapter of the Torah, with Jacob, our patriarch's adventure, the introduction of our matriarchs, Rachel and Leah, Bilhah and Zilpah, all of the things that unfold, we have something very particular and peculiar, which Robert Alter, the great biblical commentator, calls a type scene. So what is a type scene? A type scene can be used in lots of different forms of literature. It's a comparative literature term, and it means a thematic sequence and setting that happens over and over again in a certain body of literature. So the type scene that Robert Alter identifies in this week's Torah portion, which is shared throughout the books of Genesis and Exodus and going forward, is a meeting at the well. Who can, either by virtually raising your hand, because we are so blessed to have more than 50 people in the Zoom room, and if you wave at me physically, I might not be able to see you. Please don't think I'm ignoring you. It's just there's a lot of boxes to look at. Who can name me a moment in the Torah that happened near a well? You can write it in the chat. You can virtually raise your hand. Sarah Hirschhorn, what's one moment in the Torah that happened at a well?
When Rivka gave water to the camels.
Nice, excellent. Book of Genesis, the direct ancestry of our patriarch Jacob. Rebecca gives water to the camels. This just happened a couple of parashiot ago at Chaye Sarah, and that was a meeting at a well. Perfect example. What is another meeting at a well that somebody can name? Jeannie remembers that Moshe met his future wife, Zipporah, at a well in the book of Exodus. Well remembered, Jeannie, you are absolutely right. And can Miriam, Elizabeth remembers that there is a well that's associated with Miriam. Elizabeth is right that Miriam has the ability to have this well follow her in the wilderness, so the children of Israel never go without water. Anyone else have a memory of a time that people met at a well and something very important happened? We've got Moses, we've got Rebecca, we've got Miriam. Anybody else? Rachel and Jacob. Yes, Neil and Andy, and Jonathan remembers Hagar. If not for the well that Hagar was suddenly able to see, Ishmael would not have survived. They would not have survived. Rachel and Jacob. Rachel and Jacob. That is what we're mostly going to focus on today. So I am sharing my screen. This is a teaching by Rabbi Yael Rapport specifically about Parshat Toldot, which is the one immediately before our Parsha. So you can see why he starts with the story of Rebecca at the well. I'm just going to kind of scan through this. I will put a link to this particular daf limud, a text sheet, in the chat when we're done. But Abraham gives these very specific instructions, sends a servant to find an appropriate bride for his son, as was remembered, and it all happened by a well. So the servant of Abraham made the camels to kneel down outside of the city by the well at the time of the evening, the time that women go out to draw water. If you remember, our brilliant bat mitzvah, Shari Podosinsky Mertzel, knew that there was a particular clue that the servant would recognize the person intended to be Isaac's partner. This would be a person of beauty inside and out who would show kindness, and the person who gives the servant water and also gives the camels water, that is the one that you have appointed for your servant, for Isaac. Thereby shall I know that you have shown kindness unto my master Abraham. And so it came to pass. Rebecca comes to the well, and in a brilliant Devar Torah given by Cooperberg Rittmaster Rabbinical Fellow Deborah Megdal, we remember that she, with alacrity, she raced to give the camels and the servant enough water so that they were completely sated above and beyond. And that is how we know that she was the right person to marry Isaac, a person of inner and outer beauty who was met at a well. And then we get to this week's Torah portion. Can I have a volunteer reader for the English of Genesis 29? Not literally the section of the triennial that we read this morning, but this parasha. Can anybody virtually raise their hand and volunteer to read the English? Stacy, perfect. All right, Stacy.
Would you be able to make it a little larger? Because I honestly
Yes.
can't see it.
Yes. Let me try. No, don't give me the commentary. Don't give me the commentary. Just make it bigger. The things you ask Safaria for. Yeah, is that big enough, Stacy?
Yeah, is this the one that says then Jacob went on his journey?
Exactly. Perfect.
Okay,
Go right ahead.
thank you. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the children of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, 3 flocks of sheep lying there by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. And the stone upon the well's mouth was great. And thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone back upon the well's mouth in its place. Keep
All right,
going.
pause, Stacy. Beautifully read. So, Jacob is finding himself in kind of a strange land, but with the help, he joins in collaboration with a couple of other people to push the stone off the top of the well that's keeping the well protected, but can't be moved by any one particular person. And he says, where are we? We're in Haran. Oh, do you know my cousin, Lavan, the son of Nahor? We know him. That's his daughter, Rachel, who's coming with the sheep. Rachel came with her father's sheep. When Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Lavan, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Lavan, his mother's brother, he went near. Was it Rachel? Was it the sheep that Jacob was so excited about? It was probably Rachel. And he rolled the stone from the well's mouth all by himself, where it previously took a whole team of people. And he kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. There is one other particular passage in the book of Genesis, in this patriarchal narrative of father to son to father to son, where we see the importance of wells, and that's a little earlier than our Torah portion. This is a story about Isaac, Jacob's father, and this is also fitting into the type scene, but it's not necessarily the romantic narrative that we see when Jacob meets Rachel, or when Isaac's servant of Abraham meets Rebecca, or when Moses meets Zipporah, but it still helps to elucidate how important water is in the Torah and in the ancient Near East. So Isaac is the protagonist of the story here. Now, all the wells which his father, that's Abraham's servants, had digged in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines had stopped them up and filled them with earth. And the king Avimelech says to Isaac, leave us, you're much mightier than we are. And he redug all of the wells of water that Abraham had dug in his generation, so that water would once again flow and nourish his crops and nourish his livestock and nourish his family. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of living water, Mayim Chaim. And the herdsmen of Gerar strove with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, this water is ours. And he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him, they fought with him. And they dug another well, and they fought over that also, and he called the name of that one Sitnah. And he removed from there, and he dug another well, and there they didn't fight over it. And he called the name of it Rehovot, for now Adonai has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in this land. The very last line of this section, there's one more well to be named. The same day Isaac's servants came and told him concerning the well which they had just dug, and said to him, we have found water. And he called it Shiva. Therefore the name of the city in which he dwelt is Beer Sheva, the 7 wells, unto this day. So why is water so important? The literal is pretty evident, right? No one's going to survive in the ancient Near East as people, as animals, or as vegetables. Only minerals are going to make it if there isn't enough water to go around. But the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud in particular, in the section Bava Kama, loves to draw out these metaphors from the literal to the picturesque and the grandiose, and say it's not just about water that we're studying here. Perhaps we can liken it to the thing that keeps us going, to the thing that keeps us nourished, which many people mentioned, Torah. So can I have a volunteer reader for this section of the Talmud in English? If you could virtually raise your hand, that is something I can see. Who can read this Babylonian Talmud piece in English? Aha, I see Sarah, who I got to hear from you already. I'm just wondering if there's anybody else who hasn't had a turn to share yet. Batya, I would love you to read. Can you turn your camera on so we can see you? Yeah, there we go. Shabbat Shalom. Go right ahead.
For it was taught,
There we go.
and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water.
Okay, pause just for a second. I'll give us some context.
Yep.
We have sort of jumped from the book of Genesis to the book of Exodus, where the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness and couldn't find any water. Please continue, Batya.
3 days into the wilderness and found no water, upon which those who expound verses metaphorically said, water means nothing but Torah, as it says, ho, everyone that thirsteth, come ye for water.
Pause. Those are a verse from the prophet Isaiah. Everyone that's thirsty, come for water. And if you translate these verses metaphorically, as the rabbis did, that means it can't be anything but Torah. What else would you be thirsty for? So keep going, Batya. You're reading beautifully.
Thus it means that as they went 3 days without Torah, they immediately became exhausted. The prophets among them thereupon rose and enacted that they should publicly read the law on Sabbath, make a break on Sunday, read again on Monday, make a break again on Tuesday and Wednesday, read again on Thursday, and then make a break on Friday, so that they should not be kept for 3 days without Torah.
Gorgeous. So this is the etiological narrative. This is the origin story of our Torah reading schedule in traditional Jewish communities. So at CBST, we read Torah on Shabbat, on Saturday morning, which is highly traditional. But in a more traditional community, you would also read Torah on Monday and Thursday. How'd you pick Monday and Thursday? There are probably some pretty literal meanings there, like marketplace days were Mondays and Thursday. That's when the most people were gathered in one place. That's when you want to read Torah so that everybody can easily hear it and it's accessible to everybody. But here is this beautiful, beautiful metaphoric explanation that you can't go more than 3 days without being nourished by Torah. So if you read Torah on Shabbat, you want to make sure that people don't go more than 3 days without hearing Torah. Read it again on Monday. You can take a little break, but don't go too long. Read it again on Thursday. Take a break for Friday, and then you'll hear it again on Saturday. So you never go more than 3 days without hearing words of Torah. I want to pause from the text study just for a moment to ask, we were talking about all of the things that nourish us, but is there something that you can't go more than 3 days without in your life? Something that you would just like shrivel up, be parched without every 3 days in your life. You can put it in the chat. You can virtually raise your hand and share out loud. What for you do you need at least every 3 days to keep you going? Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I would say any type of liquid.
Definitely. Jeffrey is right on the same page as the Talmudic rabbis. Yeah, you're not going more than 3 days without some kind of liquid nourishment. Probably water, which is the whole theme that we're circling around. Thank you, Jeffrey. What else? Can people not go more than 3 days without going parched or going crazy? Elizabeth says like the particular liquid has to be coffee. Otherwise you have a very bad headache. Saying the Shema for Liz. Same things for Batya. It's got to be coffee, chocolate, and Hebrew chanting. The things that nourish Batya are the things that Batya can't go 3 days without. Eliza can't go 3 days without Torah in any form. That's beautiful. Is there anything else that anybody wants to share either out loud or in the chat? The things that you have to do at least every 3 days? I know this sounds both extremely resonant and extremely inside out, but in our pandemic reality, especially, with lockdown orders and quarantine, sometimes I don't go outside. And every 3 days, at least, preferably every day, I got to get outside. I have to feel sunshine and fresh air, or else I do get that shriveled feeling. For Saul, it's connecting with people. Jack plays the piano at least every 3 days. I have a couple of people who agree with me going outside. And who said, "Oh, Batya, this is so beautiful and so heartbreaking." There are things that we're learning to go 3 days without. There are things that we presumed we could not go without. And hugs are one of them for Batya. And I'm really glad that words of Torah and coffee and chocolate are helping you keep going, even without the hugs of other people. Listening to music, reading fiction for either Neil or Andy, I totally agree. And Jeannie has to have some time to like turn off the brain, mindlessly watch some TV, and just sort of like renew your battery. Absolutely. Jonathan is looking forward to the day that you can go 3 days without Zoom. May it come speedily and soon. Zoom is also a very precious nourishment in this time that we recognize. And a lot of these are double-edged, right? Ron's Kindle, knitting and crocheting. And it's hard. Darina's pointing out that as a person who lives very far from CBST and who became part of our community in 2016, online communication was absolutely essential to be connected to community. And now we're all pretty much feeling that way. So we have sort of discerned what are the things that keep us going, and then really when we drill down to it, what are the things we need at least every 3 days, either as individuals or as a community to keep us going. I love that Joy needs your own fashion shows to keep you going. I think that might have to become a thing that all of us need every 3 days to keep us going. That's a fantastic answer. And so to close today, I wanted to offer this last section of Talmud for us to study together. Like water, so like Torah. This section is from Eruvin. We were in Bava Kama up here, but now we're in a separate section, which is the one that was just closed recently for those who are following the Daf Yomi. Eruvin having to do with boundaries. So like water is like Torah. Who is willing to read in English this translation of the Babylonian Talmud? I'll call on Sarah if there isn't somebody who hasn't gotten to speak yet, who would like to do this final reading for us. Is there anybody who hasn't yet shared?
Elizabeth Free was raising her hand.
Oh, great. Dave, can you unmute Elizabeth? Because I can't see Elizabeth if just like a real hand is being waved. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom, Elizabeth.
Shabbat Shalom. Who, me? Me, Elizabeth?
Woo-hoo. Yes, please.
Well, there's so many of us. There's a couple of us.
It's true.
Okay, so.
Start with words of Torah.
Thank you. Words of Torah are compared to water. Everyone that thirsts, come to the water. Isaiah.
Okay, pause just for a second. That's the same Isaiah quote that we had back in Bava Kama. A little bit of a different translation, same Hebrew words. Keep going, Elizabeth.
As water reaches from one end of the world to the other, so Torah reaches from one end of the world to the other, Olavai. As water gives life to the world, so Torah gives life to the world. As water is given without cost to the world, so is Torah given without cost to the world. As water is given from heaven, so Torah is given from heaven. As water is given with thunder, so was Torah given to the accomplishment of thunder at Sinai. Mm-hmm. As water restores a person's spirit, so Torah restores a person's spirit. As water cleanses a person from uncleanliness, so Torah cleanses an unclean person from their uncleanliness. As water comes down in many drops and becomes a mighty river, so Torah, today a person learns 2 halakot, tomorrow 2 more, and so on, until they become like a bubbling brook. As water leaves a high place and flows to a low place, so Torah leaves him whose opinion of themselves is high and cleaves to those whose spirit is lowly. As water is not kept in vessels of silver or gold, but only in the cheapest of vessels. So Torah abides only in one who regards himself or herself as lowly and as earthenware vessel. As, when thirsty, a grown person is not ashamed to say to a child, "Let me have a drink of water," so in studying Torah, a grown person who has learned should not be ashamed to say to a child, "Teach me a chapter, or a verse, or a word," or even, "Teach me a single letter." Todah. As with water, so one does not know how to swim in it, they will end by drowning. So with words of Torah, if one does not know how to swim in them and teach them, they will drown in the end.
Beautifully read. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Welcome.
And so for all of these things, we can read Torah as pretty literal, exactly as we read the nourishment must be from water. Literally, living things cannot go without water. Literally, we can mean words of Torah that have to be shared at least every 3 days, or else our souls become shriveled and parched. So too can we read this in a much broader metaphorical sense, all of these incredibly important things that keep us going, whether they are dark chocolate or fashion shows or playing the piano or hearing and speaking and teaching words of Torah, so too do they parch our thirst and keep us going. They are worldwide and accessible, like online communication. They give life to the entire world and to us. Most of the things that we mentioned are in fact free. You do have to pay for chocolate and coffee, but the crochet project is an investment beyond measure that far, far outweighs the cost of the yarn. As water is given from heaven, so is Torah given from heaven, even though we're taught, it's not just in the heavens, lo b'shamayim hi, but it's very close to you. It's on your lips, it's in your heart. As water is given with thunder, it's taught that at Mount Sinai, Torah was given with this unbelievable thunderclap, and the people of Israel could both see and hear and smell at the same time. Torah, this whole synesthetic experience of senses colliding. And so too, these things alight so many of our senses, usually just not one part of us, but all of these different bodily experiences. Torah restores a person's spirit, teaches a person when they have departed from a route of cleanliness of soul or of body. The Torah does get awfully specific. Torah can become a mighty river. You might start with just a couple drops, like one line, 2 laws, but then tomorrow 2 more, on and on and on until you are a bubbling brook. Torah leaves those who have very high opinions of themselves and clings to those, as we are going to say in Eitz Chaim Hi, all of those who hold fast to it know ways of happiness and peace, of simple spirits and simple gifts. Torah isn't meant to be kept far away in an ark covered with jewelry. It needs to be brought out and shared among community. And I love this particular teaching. When you're thirsty, you don't care how impressive or old or young or intimate or strange another person is. You aren't afraid or ashamed to say, "Please, I'm thirsty, let me have some water." And so too should we feel about Torah. Everyone can be a teacher. We can recognize the gifts in any person to be able to parch our spiritual thirst, to say, "Teach me something." A chapter, a verse, a word, or even a single letter, and to leave all of our baggage about who we are and who other people are at the door for the sake of learning. And finally, I think that this last line is a warning to rabbis who go on too long in Torah study. If you don't know how to swim in words of Torah or how to teach them, and they surround you too much, you might drown in the end. So this is where we will end our Torah study this morning. And thank you, everybody, for taking part in something that gives me ongoing nourishment because I learned so much from each one of you. Shabbat Shalom, and may you know nourishment and all kinds of overflowing gifts on this Shabbat Shehodu. Shalom.